This channel explores moments of self-reflection that arise in everyday life. Why Korea has no tipping. In the US, tipping is built into the system. It's not just a thank you, it's part of the wage. Many service workers are paid less per hour, and tips help complete their income. That's why tipping often feels expected, not optional. In Korea, the system works differently. Service workers in restaurants, cafes, taxis, salons already earn at least the legal minimum wage regardless of tips. Their pay does not depend directly on the customer. So no one expects a tip, and no one asks for it. But tipping still happens sometimes, not because it is required, but because someone genuinely felt satisfied. When that happens, the response feels different. You might receive a small extra service, an extra drink, or simply a sincere thank you. Because the wage is already settled, the tip does not complete the job. It steps outside the system and becomes a small human exchange. Same action, different system. Tipping stops being only about manners. It becomes a question of how each society chose to design service, pay, and gratitude. And perhaps the deeper question is this: do we notice the system behind the habits we take for granted?
What would you honestly say? Let's keep going a little deeper.
Why can't we just sit still? Silence used to be part of ordinary life, something that required no explanation. Now it feels increasingly rare, almost out of place in a world that is constantly reacting. Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." His observation suggests that silence is not simply the absence of sound. Silence has not disappeared, but our willingness to remain in it may have changed. Perhaps the issue is not noise itself, but what silence exposes. First, silence removes distraction, and our thoughts surface more clearly. Second, silence slows time. In a culture that values speed and response, stillness can feel like falling behind. And third, silence offers no performance. There is nothing to display, nothing to prove, and nothing to scroll past. Silence becomes something to manage rather than something to enter. And perhaps that quiet shift says more about us than the noise itself. So now, what if you ask yourself, do I avoid silence because it brings unresolved questions closer? Or have I simply grown, used to filling every pause without noticing why?
What would you honestly say? Let's keep going a little deeper.
Do you remember what you read? Scrolling used to feel like a small habit, something casual and harmless. Now it seems almost continuous, woven into the quiet spaces of daily life. Marshall McLuhan once wrote, "The medium is the message. We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us." His observation suggests that the structure of a tool shapes the way we think. Information has not disappeared, but our way of staying with it may have quietly changed. Maybe the issue is not information itself, but the pace at which it arrives. First, scrolling shortens attention and thoughts, rarely settle long enough to deepen. Second, scrolling rewards reaction. There is always something to tap, like, or move past. And third, scrolling fragments context. Each idea appears briefly before being replaced by the next. Understanding becomes something we assume, rather than something we build. And perhaps that subtle shift says more about us than the content itself ever could. So now, what if you asked yourself, do I scroll to understand or simply to move on? When I say I saw it, did I actually stay long enough to think about it?
What would you honestly say? Let's keep going a little deeper.
Rules for you, not for me. Double standards rarely begin as open contradictions. They emerge quietly, often justified as necessary or practical. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Humans appeal to a universal moral law when they feel wronged. We expect fairness instinctively, even when we cannot fully define it." His observation suggests that we recognize injustice the moment it disadvantages us. The difficulty begins when that same standard applies to ourselves, and we quietly look away. Maybe the issue is not dishonesty, but selectivity. First, double standards appear when an action is called wrong in others, yet becomes understandable when it is done by us or our side. Second, double standards protect identity, as we defend our side even when it contradicts our principles. And third, loyalty begins to outweigh principle. We measure behavior not by the rule itself, but by who happens to break it. What shifts is not the standard itself, but our consistency. And that quiet shift reshapes our moral ground. So now, what if you asked yourself, do I demand fairness only when it benefits me? Have I changed my standards depending on who stands before me?
What would you honestly say? Let's keep going a little deeper.
Why you never actually change. Change is a word we use easily. We speak of growth, reform, and new beginnings, as if they are always within reach. Heraclitus once suggested, "No one steps into the same river twice. Everything flows, yet remaining still requires effort as well." His insight reminds us that change happens whether we act or not. The question is whether we move with it, or merely talk while standing still. Maybe the issue is not intention, but distance between words and decisions. First, talking about change gives us emotional relief. It creates the feeling of progress without requiring risk. Second, identity resists disruption. Real change demands that we loosen habits that quietly define us. And third, comfort disguises itself as patience. We tell ourselves the timing is not right, while postponement becomes routine. Over time, discussion replaces movement. We begin to measure sincerity by how often we speak, not by what we alter. So now, what if you asked yourself, do I speak about change more often than I practice it? Have I confused talking about change with actually changing something?
What would you honestly say? Let's keep going a little deeper. See you in the next video.